Hey, this whole video is about how you mark the stories you will be reading when you take the FSA assessment. You should know that you will underline or highlight different sections of the story based upon the question they ask you. If they ask you your opinion of something, then you're going to read through all the selections they give you and highlight only the parts that match your opinion. You might highlight key words, you might circle parts that explain concepts, but really when you have an opinion prompt, you are highlighting stuff that matches your opinion. If it's an explanatory prompt where they want you to explain something, you then have to highlight what they want you to explain. So in order to know what to highlight, the first thing you'll ever do on these big writing assessments is you find out what the question is. That's on the last page. So you go all the way down to the last page. It says, fairy tales follow similar patterns and have similar themes. Read these two fairy tales and then write an essay showing that these two stories follow a traditional fairy tale theme. So is this asking you your opinion which fairy tale is better? No. So this is an explanatory one. You're going to show that these two follow a fairy tale theme. So I'm underlining that and I'm bolding it. We want to show that they kind of do what all the other fairy tales do. They have similar parts like fairy tales do, where things are magical, bad stuff happens. I'm trying to think of other notes that would follow that. Animals talk, wicked somebody is ruining things. There's something that they have to overcome. We're looking for those sort of things in these two fairy tales. We might not have any of these, so we need to come up here and actually read it. Something you need to know as well is if you read all of this and you're still not sure, read it again. If you read it, you should read it at least 2 times. If you don't understand the story, they can tell while you write your essay. So be sure to go slow. You maybe want to go read one paragraph and then read that paragraph again. But it's very, very obvious when a student doesn't understand what they read. So if you need to read each selection 2 times, please do that. Let's read Rumpelstiltskin. And remember, we're looking for common fairy tale stuff that happens in Rumpelstiltskin that we can use in our essay. Once there was a miller who was poor, but who had a beautiful daughter. Now it happened that he had to go and speak to the king. I'm underlining or I'm highlighting that. Kings, queens, that's a lot of times in fairy tales. And in order to make himself appear important, he said to him, I have a daughter who can spin straw into gold. So if we've read this before, or even if you haven't, that seems pretty important and impossible. Taking straw, which is like hay, and going to a machine and turning it into gold. This is a problem. The king said to the miller, that is an art which pleases me well, and if your daughter is as clever as you say, bring her tomorrow to my palace. Lots of stuff happens in that setting, and I will put her to the test. And when the girl was brought to him, he took her into the room, which was quite full of straw, gave her a spinning wheel and a reel, and said, now set to work, and if by tomorrow morning early, you have not spun this straw into gold during the night, you must die. Usually they take it too far in fairy tales, so I'm highlighting that. Thereupon he himself locked up the room and left her in it alone. So there sat the poor miller's daughter, and for the life of her could not tell what to do. She had no idea how straw could be spun into gold, and she grew more and more frightened, until at last she began to weep. But all at once the door opened, and in came a little man, and said, "Good evening, Mistress Miller. Why are you crying so?" "Alas," answered the girl, "I have to spin straw into gold, and I do not know how to do it." "What will you give me," said the mannikin, "if I do it for you?" "My necklace," said the girl. The little man took the necklace, seated himself in front of the wheel, and whir, 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 3 turns. The reel, I'm going to underline that, onomatopoeia. They're very good at storytelling and fairy tales. So 3 times the reel was full, and then he put another on, and whir, 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 3 times around. And the second was full too, and so it went on until morning, when all the straw was spun, and all the reels were full of gold. I'm underlining that. They had a problem. How do I spin straw into gold? This mysterious person, they call him a mannikin, did it for them. Okay? By daybreak the king was already there, and when he saw the gold, he was astonished and delighted, but his heart became only more greedy. So we've got more of a problem. Like, kind of, this guy, I guess the king could be considered the wicked stepmother, or the wicked character. He had the miller's daughter taken into another room full of straw, which was much larger, and commanded her to spin that also in one night, if she valued her life. The girl knew not how to help herself, and was crying when the door opened again, and the little man appeared and said, "What will you give me if I spin the straw into gold for you?" "The ring on my finger," answered the girl. So, yeah, no, I'm not going to underline that. The little man took the ring again, began to turn the wheel, and by morning he had spun the straw into glittering gold. So, also fairy tales, again, they're really good at telling stories. So I like the part where it said glittering gold. That made it more interesting. The king rejoiced beyond measure at the sight, but still he had not gold enough. And he had the miller's daughter taken into the larger room full of straw, and said, "You must spin this too in the course of the night, but if you succeed, you shall be my wife." Yikes. That's not good. Also, I'm going to highlight this whole paragraph, click review, and new comment. Lots of times, and you can do this when you take the test by paper, you can just write it on the side of the paper. Fairy tales will follow a pattern. Something happens one night, same thing happens the next night, and so on. So this one follows a pattern. Now, I'm not going to waste your time, but you would highlight the rest of Rapunzel the same way, where you're finding things that you're like, hey, yeah, that happened in other fairy tales too, so that you can use that for your essay. Let's look at Rapunzel real quick. There once was a man and woman who had long in vain wished for a child. That one happens quite a bit in fairy tales. At length, the woman hoped that God was about to grant her desire. These people had a little window at the back of their house, from which a splendid garden could be seen, which was full of the most beautiful flowers and herbs. It was, however, surrounded by a high wall. I'm highlighting this because it makes me think of castles. Also, it's just good storytelling where they're describing the setting. And no one dared to go into it, because it belonged to an enchantress, I'm thinking wicked, who had great power and was dreaded by all the world. One day the woman was standing by this window and looking down into the garden, when she saw a bed which was planted with the most beautiful rampion, Rapunzel, and so I'm thinking this might be some kind of flower or plant, and it looked so fresh and green that she longed for it and had the greatest desire to eat some. So this enchantress wants what she can't have. Excuse me. This desire increased every day, and as she knew that she could not get any of it, she quite pined away and began to look pale and miserable. Then her husband was alarmed. And was it the enchantress that wanted this, or was it the woman? Hold on, let's go back and reread. If you don't understand it, you can't write about it. says, who had great power and was dreaded by all the world. One day the woman, so I think it's the woman, who was standing by her window, yeah, they mentioned the window earlier, and looking down into the garden when she saw the bed of plants. Okay, so this was the man's wife wanted to eat that. This desire increased every day, and as she knew that she could not get any of it, she quite pined away and began to look pale and miserable. Then her husband was alarmed and asked, "What ails you, dear wife?" "Ah," she replied, "if I can't eat some of the rampion which is in the garden behind our house, I shall die." Yikes. More dying. They go too far in fairy tales sometimes. The man who loved her thought sooner than let your wife die, bring her some of the rampion yourself. Let it cost what it will. At twilight, he clambered down over the wall into the garden of the enchantress. Yikes. Hastily clutched a handful of rampion and took it to his wife. She at once made herself a salad of it. So like a lettuce, I guess, maybe? I don't know. And ate it greedily. It tasted so good to her, so very good, that the next day she longed for it 3 times as much as before. So this again is that part I was talking about where they let things happen the same way over the course of several days. If he was to have any rest, her husband must once more descend into the garden. In the gloom of the evening, therefore, he let himself down again. Yikes. But when he clambered down the wall, he was terribly afraid, for he saw the enchantress standing before him. "How can you dare," said she with an angry look, "descend into my garden and steal my rampion like a thief? You shall suffer for it." Punishment. They have that in fairy tales. "Ah," answered he, "let mercy take the place of justice. I only made up my mind to do it out of necessity. My wife saw your rampion from the window and felt such a longing for it that she would have died if she had not gotten to eat some to eat." Then the enchantress allowed her anger to be softened, and she said to him, "If the case is as you say, I will allow you to take away with you as much rampion as you will. Only I make one condition. You must give the child which your wife will bring into the world." I'm highlighting that. Give me the child which my wife will bring into the world. They do that quite a bit in just fairy tales. Also, it's weird behavior. It's old-timey behavior to give away your kids like that. "It shall be well treated, and I will take care of her like a mother." The man in his terror consented. Yikes, so that means he agreed to everything. And when the woman was brought to bed, the enchantress appeared at once. Gave the child... Oh, I see. Terror agreed. The enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name of Rapunzel, like the plant, and took it away with her. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child under the sun. This is good storytelling, and then also fairy tale-ish. They always, the princess or the whatever is always the most beautiful. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress shut her into a tower. We had a tower in the last one, didn't we? Or maybe I'm thinking of the beginning of this story, which lay in the forest. It's usually in a forest. And had neither stairs nor door, so no escape. Wait, let me highlight this. No escape. But quite at the top was a little window. There was a window in the beginning, too. When the enchantress wanted to go in, she placed herself beneath it and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Rapunzel had magnificent long hair, fine as spun gold. Spun gold, we just talked about that. And when she heard the voice of the enchantress, she unfastened her braided tresses, wound them round one of the hooks at the window above, and then the hair fell 20 ells, I guess that might be feet, down, and the enchantress climbed by it. So that's weird. In real life, that stuff doesn't happen. After a year or two, it came to pass that the king's son, we have another king in this story, the king's son rode through the forest and passed the tower. Then he heard a song, which was so charming that he stood still and listened. This was Rapunzel, who in her solitude passed the time letting her sweet voice resound. The king's son wanted to climb up to her and looked for the door of the tower, but none was to be found. He rode home, but the singing had so deeply touched his heart, so deeply touched his heart. It's just another example. They write so beautifully in fairy tales. That every day he went out into the forest and listened to it. Once he was thus standing behind a tree, he saw the enchantress came there, and he heard how she cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." So I'm going to stop there because the video is getting long. I want to remind you that when you are highlighting for explanatory, you're finding a way to make it simple. So what I highlighted, I had similar things between both stories. Setting is similar. They had a tower, they had a castle, it was in a forest. The writing is similar amongst fairy tales. They have really beautiful writing. They use good adjectives. They use comparisons. As comparisons, they were like as beautiful as the sun, stuff like that. Characters are similar. We have a king. We have people who get in trouble. People in trouble. Odd characters in fairy tales. Also, the problems are similar. They get themselves into trouble and then they have to find a way out. The writing, remember, we talked about over the course several days, pattern, repeat. They repeat stuff. This happened again. And then the next day they came back and it happened again. And if you read farther in Rapunzel, that's how that goes too. So I take all of my ideas that I highlighted and I turn them into 3 main ideas, hopefully. Let's say you get in big trouble on the FSA and you can't come up with 3 main ideas, but you can come up with 2 super amazing, incredible, strong ideas, like the setting and the characters, but you didn't figure out the whole writing part. Well, then that's fine too. You just want to really sell those 2 paragraphs and make them the best paragraphs you've ever written. I hope that helps, and we're going to practice some of this in the next couple screens. Good luck.